A few years back, I was a shift manager for my local big box pharmacy/convenience store. It was right across my backyard, and could sprint there in under a minute if I really wanted to, so it worked for me. I was 30, though looked about 19. I worked out a lot, and while I was fit, I was a smaller girl. Even though I was married, I did constantly get hit on and asked out. It was flattering, but always made me feel awkward. I promise I'm not being narcissistic, just building the scene. Now this particular store I worked at was in a weird part of town, on the right side of town to attract the Karens, but close enough to the not so good side of town to attract the drug addicts/drunks/psychopaths, though I guess some of that is just in part of working for a pharmacy. Anyway, let me say I'm not someone that scares easily. I've had someone high on meth crash their car into the side of our store, causing the back of our store to bend inward because we didn't carry pineapple juice, and had a man pick me up, throw me over his shoulder, and start walking out the door with me saying you'd make a good wife. Yeah. It started on a Sunday morning. I remember this because I was busy building end caps and making sale signs. I was with my favorite coworker, so the day was flying by, and I was really bubbly. A man and his son came into my store, and they made a beeline for me. The man was probably not quite 6 feet, and skinny. He had dreadlocks, a long skinny silver earring dangling from his ear, and this tan trench coat that I found odd because it was summer. I greeted them, and asked if they needed some help. He spoke with a thick Jamaican accent, and said his GPS stopped working, like those old ones before they were standard in our phones, and wanted to see if we had any. I let out a small laugh, thinking he was messing with me. No, that would be at Best Buy or something, but we have a small section of electronics on this wall. I indicated to the wall in back of me. Oh. Thanks, he said, taking a look, but also keeping his eyes on me. Something about them just chilled me. He was speaking another language to his son, but I keep going about my tasks for the day. He would call me to help him, asking questions about chargers and SD cards. I answered them. Then he started telling me how beautiful I was. I thanked him awkwardly. You must work out, yeah? He asked. Yoga, mostly. I replied, getting more and more uncomfortable. He made some more comments about my body, telling me he loved my tattoos, and was just being a creep. I tried to stay polite, and eventually just walked away to do busy work. I avoided him, but he was still staring at me. He had his phone out, and I kept hearing the shuddering of a camera. I went to the office, telling my other coworker that I thought the guy was taking my picture, and just making me uncomfortable. He came out and watched over me. The creepy man and his son left shortly after my coworker came out. By the time the end of my shift came, I forgot about the creep. A few weeks later, I was up front ringing customers with a different coworker. We were crazy busy, but I was the manager on duty. After we got the line down, my coworker handed me an envelope. What's this? I asked her. I don't know. A man in dreadlocks told me to give it to you. I took the envelope and went into my office. There were dozens and dozens of pictures of me. My heart sank. I had no idea these were taken. Most of them were of me in the store working, some of me walking home, and some with me and my daughter. I felt sick. There was a note with it. It said something along the lines of, "You're so beautiful, I'm in love with you. I'd be a better husband than what you have now. Please give me a chance." There was more to it, but it's in police evidence now. The guy stupidly left his name and address. I called our store manager and the police. They took our camera footage, my statement, and the pictures and letter. They told him he needed to stay away from me or next time he gets arrested, and he was banned from the store. I was relieved, but still a bit bothered by it. A few more weeks to a month went by. It was another busy Sunday night. It was just myself as the manager on duty, and another coworker as my cashier. We were ringing together when I noticed a man staring at me. This man was tall with a medium build. He had dreadlocks and the same silver earring and long tan trench coat as the other man did. This man was really scary. His eyes were just cold and dead and angry. They were staring through my soul. He didn't have anything to purchase, just stood and stared. I tried to smile politely at him, then another wave of customers came. I got lost in helping everyone, but didn't see the man anymore. When it calmed down, I still didn't see him. I decided to go start facing the back of the store and told my coworker to call if she needed me. As I was back there, I heard that Jamaican accent an aisle over. I looked up at the mirror to see the scary man on the phone. Yes, she's here. No, just one other girl with her. I can grab her when she leaves, no problem. I was horrified. He didn't see me, so I slowly made my way to the front. I briefly tell my coworker what's going on, then call the police and my store manager. The cops took him away. A few days later, a detective came to speak to me. The two men were brothers. They were abducting women and using them for human trafficking. He told me I was very lucky. I later found out they found a woman beaten to death in their apartment. They have both since gone to prison. This still gives me nightmares. That woman easily could have been me. This is a somewhat horrifying but also hilarious story that happened to my best friend. Me and him were sports players together when we were younger and have always been close ever since. His name is Brian, and we were about 20 years old when his story happened. He had just gotten a job at GameStop. He was really excited about being able to get discounts on games and to even be able to play games a few days early in some cases with the new releases. Me and him both loved playing video games together, and it was probably a dream job in a lot of ways. Now, my friend Brian is a great guy in a lot of ways, but he isn't the sharpest knife in the drawer if you catch my drift. On the football field, or the basketball field, or even in Call of Duty, he was probably the best. But when it came to reading a book or passing a test, well, let's just say that he would be on the bench if he could for that kind of stuff. Things started out one day when we both decided that we wanted to start playing horror games. I had watched a Let's Play Resident Evil. I thought it would be a really fun idea. He wasn't a big fan of horror, but he was willing to play whatever games we could get, especially because he got such a nice employee discount at GameStop. We had spent one Friday night playing Resident Evil until 4 o'clock in the morning. I didn't have anywhere to be the next day, and he wasn't working until 12, so we figured that there was no harm, no foul. Now, before I go any further, I would just like to say that your brain is like a sponge. You absorb information and stimuli and process it in various ways. Sometimes, your brain can process information in a way that you might not expect it to do. Sometimes things can really stick with you. They can really play a role in your psyche. And I think Resident Evil did that for my friend Brian. So, he worked that shift the next day. And when I talked to him that night when he got off of work, he started telling me that he thought someone had been murdered at GameStop. Again, not the sharpest knife in the drawer. I started asking him more about the details, and the only evidence that he found was a random pile of blood. It was located outside the store on the side of the building where most people don't usually go. He started telling me that he thought his manager had murdered someone. I jokingly told him that we shouldn't play Resident Evil anymore. We decided for a different game that night, and I didn't ask him to play Resident Evil again. And he never asked me to do so either. So, whatever psychological change happened to my friend, it took place over the course of playing Resident Evil one time for a couple of hours. Weeks literally went by and he was still talking about the pile of blood that he saw outside of GameStop. It would only happen on random occasions according to him. I tried telling him that there must have been some kind of explanation for it. I mean, maybe someone was dumping spaghetti sauce or something. There was a pizza place in the same strip mall. He didn't buy it though. He was thoroughly convinced that someone had been murdered and the murderer was draining out a small amount of blood, and then putting it in this one spot outside of GameStop. He sounded really serious when he talked about it, but he never called the police or anything. He told me he asked his manager once about it and his manager told him not to worry about it. It just didn't seem like that big of a deal. But I remember this one time that we have been playing Call of Duty for about 3 hours one night. He started talking about it in detail and how much it freaked him out. He told me that he was having nightmares regularly and that he didn't like working at GameStop anymore. I tried telling him that this wasn't a big situation and he was just being paranoid, but he wouldn't listen to me. It wasn't very long before he decided to quit that job at GameStop. It was really sad because he no longer got any of the perks of being an employee. This also meant that I didn't get any of the perks of being a friend of an employee there, which also sucked. But Brian was very insistent that something horrible was going on there, and he didn't want to end up getting murdered for knowing too much about some kind of criminal activity. A couple of days later, my curiosity got the better of me and I just had to know where this pile of blood was coming from. It turned out that one of the other GameStop employees had been someone I went to high school with, and I messaged them on Facebook. I asked them about this mysterious pile of blood and everything. And then he told me this. The truck driver who occasionally delivers the games and merchandise to this GameStop has a truck that isn't the greatest. It isn't that large or anything, and it's the same one that always makes deliveries to the specific GameStop for some kind of logistical reasons. The truck gets a certain amount of rust for some reason, and the truck driver cleans the truck off in this one particular spot every time he delivers there. When I found that out, I laughed uncontrollably for about 1 hour. Brian literally found a pile of rust and thought it was blood. As much as I love that guy like a brother and respect him as a person, things like this are why I have such a hard time taking him seriously. I only just messaged this guy on Facebook a day ago, and I haven't even spoken to Brian since. He works at a restaurant now, and it's been really busy there. I'm not sure if I should even tell him though. A part of me really wants to tell him and make fun of him, but I don't want to hurt his feelings too bad. I might low-key send him a link to a video about rust and see if he connects the dots. And that's the story about my friend Brian, who isn't the sharpest knife in the drawer. And how he was convinced that people were being murdered and their blood was being dumped outside of GameStop, but it was actually just a pile of rust. So, I have this friend. They're a little bit off the walls. One of those conspiracy theories, very much into the paranormal types of people. I'm talking about the kind of person that watches the X-Files and thinks it's probably true. Of course, she dresses it up like she's just playing around and doesn't actually believe in it wholeheartedly, but I'm smart enough to know that she uses humor as a way to distance herself from what she actually believes. I think some of the crazy that she says, she actually thinks. No, this isn't to disparage her or anything, she's an otherwise really nice person. And she only starts talking about this kind of stuff once you get her going. Sometimes we can go days without ever talking about ghosts, or aliens, or anything else like that. But if someone starts talking about feeling a spirit in the room, that's the end of it for the night. I just wanted to give you that background because I feel it's very pertinent to the story. Well, this particular friend happens to work at Walmart. There have been a lot of recent changes lately, and what happened is that she got stuck on the night shift. I'm sure you can imagine how this went. He put someone that's into paranormal stuff on night shift, and the next thing you know, they have 1,000,001 different stories about ghosts and monsters and everything else. That's kind of how it went for the first few weeks. Every time I hung out with her, she would talk about how horrible it was to be working on night shift, and then she would start talking about all of the monsters and creatures that she would see out of the corner of her eye. I just remember thinking to myself multiple times, if she actually believes that she sees stuff while she's at work. Well, as time went on, she became much more mild with the stories. I guess she had just gotten used to working the night shift at Walmart. And then I remember there being one party then we went to. It was me, her, and a bunch of other people from our friend group. It wasn't one of those crazy alcohol-filled adventures as you see in movies or anything like that. It was much more of a bunch of friends getting together and hanging out. I mean, we're all adults and everything. The person whose house we were hanging out at owned the home, but I don't know what else we could have called it other than a party. Anyway, my one perceptive friend had a little bit too much to drink this night. And she started going on about her job, like usual. And then all of a sudden, things took a turn. For the worse. She started talking about seeing a dead person walking around the store. I remember her talking about the exact details of how he died. She claimed that he had shot himself in the heart to kill himself. And she saw him walking around Walmart late at night when no one else was around. Some of our other friends were less hesitant to call her on her nonsense. And she started getting really offended. She left that night after, and in retrospect, I probably should have stopped her from driving home considering that she was extremely intoxicated. If I'm gonna be honest with you, that I didn't even cross my mind until the next morning. This guy that committed suicide by shooting himself in the heart became the only thing she ever talked about when it came to the ghosts and whatnot of her night shift job at Walmart. And I found it really strange. It was one of the less believable stories that she would tell us about. I mean, she would always talk about there being a pack of wolves in the forest on the other side of the Walmart parking lot, but I just didn't have the same glamour that the suicide guy did. The thought of there being some zombie walking around Walmart at night that only she could see seemed as ridiculous as it sounds. And I just kind of chalked it up to her own mind problems for it all. Well, a couple of months went by. She was still on the suicide heart guy kick, even after all this time. I decided to do some research on this specific Walmart to prove to her that no one had ever committed suicide on or near the premises, especially in that way. I remember getting my laptop out one night and Googling this local Walmart's address. I'm going to spare any identifying details for obvious reasons. I read about every single death that had occurred on the premises since the place was built in the 1980s. I read about one guy who accidentally died of a stroke in '85. I read about there being a terrible accident with a forklift about 7 years ago. I didn't see anything about anyone committing suicide at any point in time. I was just about done with my search, and I was in that post-research phase where I was just kind of reading around random information aimlessly. And that was when I came across the news archives that I couldn't believe. It had been written during the time that his Walmart was being built. The story went like this. One of the crewmen who were responsible for building the Walmart had some serious problems. His only son died at 10 years old, and I guess this guy never really recovered after that. He had taken his own life after working the graveyard shift one night. The article talked about him being the only person that was willing to work all the way to 12 a.m. and sometimes later. He had a shotgun in his truck and then he committed suicide right in the forest nearby. And here's the craziest part, he shot himself in the chest exactly the way my friend had described. I haven't told my friend about this. I know I would never hear the end of it. But I just find it so strange that her weird goofy little interest in the paranormal somehow uncovered something like this. Now, every time she starts talking about ghosts or the paranormal, I make sure to start listening for something that might be true. Don't get me wrong, I try to filter out the obvious hoopla, but now that I've seen her get something unbelievably right once, I'm just waiting for her to do it again.